What kind of one shot in Grandis? I have the minimum of 30 sec and 10 mil range. Well, if you're still looking at your range when you're in Grandis, then something is missing there. Do you have specific mobbing and bossing setups that you're switching between? Mobbing, link skills, mobbing, hyperstats, mobbing, legion setup? Are you alternating your guild skills for extra bonus damage? 30% critical damage, then 30% damage, alternating every half hour so that you have bonus damage? There's a bunch of things you can do, right? Do you have the right map rotation? Remember, one-shotting is not necessarily the thing you want to look for. You want to look for map clearing. That's the goal for training. None of that, no? Okay, we'll start there. Because as soon as you get to 260, what you get is you get a lot of hyperstat points, right? You want to make two separate build-ups. So you can check exclamation mark hyperstats. That'll probably help you in determining what you want your setups to look like. When it comes to the Legion grid, same thing. You want to prioritize similar stats and you want to have them... So I can give you an example. For example, my character here is 252. You can almost clear every spawn as a non-warrior. Well, if you do switch those things, you probably can then. So when you look at the link skills, for example, so when I go bossing, I'll use this one. So I've got things like boss damage in here, IED, some utility, the Spirit of Freedom to revive so you're immune longer when you res, right? Terms and condition, a little bit extra burst damage. Just extra damage when I'm moving, extra critical rate to get me to 100%, right? Empirical knowledge stack, that's what I'm bossing. And then when I'm bossing, my hyperstat will look like this. So I got enough crit rate to get to 100%, and then some critical damage, ID damage, boss damage, right? Pretty evenly distributed over those stats. And then my Legion, because my main damage comes from Infinity, my Legion will be this setup here. So that I have my buff duration maxed out, so I have long infinities, enough IED to deal enough damage to the bosses, and then enough crit rate to hit 100, critical damage on top of that crit rate, and then everything left over goes into boss damage. If I had more, I'd either go more into crit, so I could maybe move some link skills over, or maybe move some hyperstats over, or I'd go into the middle here to get more intellect first and then more magic attack. Now, conversely, if I'm going to be mobbing, then my setup is going to be this instead. I still want the buff duration because I want the final damage, but I don't want the IED anymore because regular monsters don't have any PDR, so you don't need IED to break through any armor. They don't have armor. So you want to get bonus EXP instead if you can, but more importantly, instead of boss damage, you want to get normal monster damage because that's the damage that applies to normal monsters. So this shifts over to there, and then if you have left over, you can go into bonus EXP to get more EXP from the monsters you can kill. So that's what your Legion, at least if you have a buff duration character. If you don't have a buff duration character, it would look more something like this, where you go into crit rate and then go into the middle stats instead. Just like with this, this one is for buff duration characters, this one is for intellect characters, and then go into critical rate, and then this one is for strength characters, basically the same thing. And then, so the hyperstats will be prioritizing in the same way as the other one. Instead of getting IED and boss damage, those will be 0 in this setup. And the crit rate, again, will be enough that you need. And then the other stats will go into bonus EXP and into normal monster damage instead. Where this setup has 0 there, because the EXP from bosses is basically 0, and they don't summon normal monsters. So you basically switch those two stats out. And then the link skill setup will look something like this, where instead of prioritizing IED, boss damage, and your critical rate and then as much damage as possible, like for bossing, you'll instead use no IED. This one gives IED now, but it's because it gives 14% damage against monsters with full HP. So that's really nice to get closer to one-shotting when you're mobbing. And then you still get enough crit rate, right, to hit 100%. Once you have that, any critical damage. And then you get the EXP one, so you get the Evan, the Aaron, and the Mercedes. And then best would be to get enough damage so you can one-shot, right? Or so you can map clear, and then get as much EXP on top of that. But my character's more than strong enough to do that, so I have the EXP in there, and then things like the Arc, the Demon Avenger, Elementalism, the Lara Link skill, very big, of course. Tide of Battle if you're moving around a lot. If you're more stationary, you don't take Tide of Battle because it will never stack, so you don't get the damage from that. So make sure you work towards building like two sets like that, one for mobbing, one for bossing, and then basically before before you switch functions, you just select the other one, and then boom, you're ready to go, you know? The one, I guess, that would go on top of this, but it's a little bit harder for most people, is also have a familiar setup, one for mob and one for bossing. So what I'll have is one with two 15% ID familiars. So that's what I'm bossing. Or when I'm doing, when I'm doing bosses that need a lot of damage. When I'm doing the bosses that I know I can kill anyway, or when I'm mobbing, I'll have a 15% IED because it has the highest defense, so it'll take less of my familiar gauge when I have it summoned here, right? So the gauge will go down slower. And then the other one is a drop rate one, so I can get more meso bags to drop and more items to drop from this potential line. And I do have one healing as well from before, so I could use that one in certain boss fights where it's needed. So the further you go and the more spots you get in the Legion grid, the more points you get in the hyperstat, the more link skills you get access to, the more you can specifically build presets for specific situations. And there's even a situation where you could go for a third setup here for extra arcane power on the black mage, because there is a overlap with having arcane power in an event buff like we have now in the Identist gift. If you get enough arcane power here and you put enough arcane power here, you can get to the point where you can do 10% final damage bonus to the black mage, because he requires 1320. So to get 10% final damage, you need 132 extra. So that'll be 1,452. So if you get to 1,460, so including the extra bonus from the guild, and then also from the event and from this, you can get to plus 10%, which will give you more damage than basically anything else can. So then that'll be priority for your hyperstats. So yeah, check out the videos if you need to. Like I have a hyperstat video where I talk about that more in depth, and basically just trying to convey the logic of what do you prioritize in terms of stat, and you have the same priority for everything. Priority doesn't mean max it out first before you go to the next one, but look at that stat first before you start looking at the next one. If you have enough, then you can move on. If you don't have enough, you need to put points in, basically.